Good evening, Bahamas. Coming up tonight, Acklins evacuees headed home tomorrow.
The former Attorney General addresses those politicians owing thousands to utility companies.
Well, the Ministry of Education now making way on an audit for those contract workers.
Our news is brought to you by Alive, the nation's newest and best LTE network.
Good to be alive.
Welcome to our news and thanks for joining us. I'm Kyle Joaquin. Topping news tonight, despite their initial reluctance to leave, all residents of Acklins, including those evacuated from Salina Point, will return to their storm-ravaged home tomorrow or as soon as the all-clear is given in the area. That's according to NEMA Director Captain Stephen Russell.
The aim is to get them back into the island, not necessarily forcing them back into the district. 2 or 3 shelters are being prepared just outside of their community. There may be some distance to bus from Spring Point or Fairfield into Salina Point, but we can arrange it with one person to be able to go and at least have a look at their property.
Captain Russell said what government really is trying to do is give those displaced on Acklins the opportunity to see the extent of damage done to their property. And if damage is to the point where their home is unlivable, a shelter has been prepared.
And there's something to get into their property just to clear up, to make it livable. They cannot just stay away and hope that when they return it's all done. They have to physically go and prepare their homes. And where there are any levels of destruction, we can find a way to assist them to make it more livable. But they need to get there to look at it.
When we spoke to those residents now staying at the Kendall Isaac Gymnasium, they objected to staying in Nassau or moving to another settlement in Acklins. Instead, they call on government to quickly conduct cleanup on Salina Point, enabling them to return home. But as for Ragged Islanders, according to Russell, a lot of them didn't wait for NEMA despite the area being declared unlivable. They took the boat back home themselves.
We have not organized a mission to Ragged Island because we know one of the local mail boats was transporting some 30 persons to Ragged Island, and they were to remain in Ragged Island as a base for those persons. I think it's the captaincy. That's the information we gathered, to allow persons to go and do some cleanup of their community, collect their personal items that were left behind, and were allowed to return back to New Providence. But we have not organized a mission back into Ragged Island as yet.
The Prime Minister has announced government's plans to make Ragged Island a smart island. But Captain Russell said he doesn't think people quite understand how unrealistic it is for the government to constantly fix homes for people after a hurricane.
It's a very expensive operation. I think the Bahamas is probably one of the only countries in the jurisdiction, the Caribbean jurisdiction, that I'm aware of, that really reconstruct a house for persons. Okay? Like I said, it's not sustainable for every year to be rebuilding homes for persons whose homes were destroyed. We have to look at some of the formula to providing some assistance, but to go and build a house, a 1, 2, or 3 bedroom house, a 1 bedroom house is of $71,000. A 3 bedroom house can go up to almost $115,000. And if you have to build over 100 homes in any island, that's almost $10 million a cycle. It can be pretty costly.
Sadly, the Bahamas sits in a hurricane zone where every year there's the fear of these potentially deadly storms disrupting life as we know it. And with Hurricane Maria brushing along the eastern side of the country, the southeast Bahamas remains under hurricane watch. And as we near the end of September, we've officially entered the active part of the hurricane season for the Bahamas. Russell said NEMA is prepared.
We're always in a state of preparedness, not just for hurricanes, any form of man-made or natural disaster. Within an hour, I can call the whole national disaster community together. And we prepare ourselves to respond to an event. Boating mishap, aircraft mishap, we can call them up and we converge to respond to an event. All the national resources are disposable to bring to bear to solve an issue or to respond to an event. So in terms of our state of preparedness, we're always in a state of preparedness.
Well, Education Minister Jeff Lloyd says his ministry had attempted to place Acklins students in schools on New Providence until the government is able to complete restoration efforts on the ravaged settlement of Salina Point, but their parents weren't having it because they have no desire to remain in New Providence.
We got an issue with the students from Salina Point. Okay, and the parents and the students who are now housed at Kendall Isaac Gymnasium. We have made an attempt to invite those parents to have those students accommodated in the various schools and their immediate surroundings. The Yellow Elder School is there for the primary students. The government high school is there for those students who would be in the high school. The parents have adamantly refused. They are not going to allow their children to go to any of those schools.
Lloyd says 2 Salina Point teachers were provided with the necessary resources to work with students during their time in New Providence shelters. However, it is unclear what will happen once Acklins residents return home tomorrow, as the education minister says none of the schools on that island will be operational anytime soon.
They don't have habitable living conditions in Salina Point. In fact, none of the schools in Acklins are operational, none. Snug Corner, Lovely Bay, all of them have got to have repairs done to their buildings, particularly the roof, and so they cannot be accommodated at this time. But we are working very, very assiduously to get that. The only interruption right now, of course, is Hurricane Maria, and those islands are under tropical storm watch, so we're not going to be able to do that until we receive the all clear.
There is a lack of donors coming into the National Emergency Management Agency in the wake of Hurricane Irma, according to NEMA Director Captain Stephen Russell. He labeled it donor fatigue, where usual donors have chosen to send their money elsewhere.
When I say donor fatigue, donors are tired of a single country coming or 18 countries coming for something. So they prefer to channel all the resources to our regional organization, SEDIMA, and say, SEDIMA, based on the priorities in the region, you issue the funds accordingly. If you notice, over the past year, for the year so far, the season so far, I said the 18 countries are part of the SEDIMA mechanism, and probably as much as 9 or more have been impacted some way by hurricanes during the course of the season. Belize in the deep south, Central America, Trinidad, Barbados, Antigua, Barbuda, Anguilla, the British Virgin Islands, Haiti to a certain extent, the Bahamas. So almost 9 or more of SEDIMA's partners, we have been impacted.
Immediately following Hurricane Joaquin in 2015 and Matthew in 2016, donors from the U.S., the Florida Keys in particular, sprung into action, sending much-needed money and supplies to the island. However, after being hit hard by Hurricane Irma, Floridians are dealing with recovery of their own. But he said donations are coming in slowly.
Donors that we can always rely on the Americans within 40 hours of making a call, and it brings some immediate commodities, the tops, the water bottles. So they within a matter of 40 hours, the aircraft came in and we got those donations. The Chinese who are here, they made a commitment to give us something sometime early next week. Our port has done something. They're going to make a presentation sometime next week as well. So they're coming in gradually.
In other news, former Attorney General Allison Maynard Gibson says there is nothing unusual about the Bahamas Power and Light policy, which prevented certain public officials from having their power supply disconnected for non-payment. She told our Giorgio Bain that while recent revelations about the list are not surprising, she didn't know such a list existed.
Former Attorney General Allison Maynard Gibson says there's no need to question a list put forth that includes former politicians owing BPL thousands of dollars, as management would make the best decision for the company. Several former Progressive Liberal Party members of Parliament and a current member of the Minister Cabinet were named on a special list of public officials who could not be disconnected despite their failure to pay their electricity bills. Former BEC Executive Chairman Leslie Miller insisted it was an unspoken policy he met in place from as far back as 1989, and added it was a courtesy intended to spare those officials the embarrassment of having their power supply disconnected for non-payment. Maynard Gibson says this doesn't surprise her.
I wasn't aware of the policy, but I'm not surprised. I mean, I think if we look all over the world, entities like that are utility companies and other entities, banks, etc., may decide, a bank for example, may decide not to bounce a check of a very high profile or special client. And so these kinds of things are not unusual.
BPL has since reached out to those persons and warned them that they could face disconnection if they do not pay off those hefty bills or come to some sort of arrangement with the power company. Maynard Gibson was asked if she thinks it's fair for certain persons to get special treatment when the average BPL customer is shut off for a $200 bill.
BPL and BEC have existed for decades, and I really don't second guess the managers of those corporations or the chairman of the corporations. I trust them as Bahamian managers, and I'm sure they did what they thought was right. So I don't want to second guess whatever was in their mind when they were doing what they were doing.
The former PLP MP also weighed in on Works Minister Desmond Bannister's assertion that there was irregularities in the tender process of BPL contracts. Bannister revealed in Parliament on Wednesday that a company owned by PLP Chairman Emeritus Errington Minky Isaacs and a company owned by the father of former Education Minister Jerome Fitzgerald were awarded millions of dollars in contracts. Isaacs declined comment while Fitzgerald insisted he had no influence over the BPL contract and in no way benefited from it. The former Attorney General questioned why Bannister would comment publicly on this when he claims police are reviewing the Ernst & Young audit, which uncovered the information.
That is something that's being insinuated. I doubt that it is the case because there are bidding processes, and I also trust those who are in management as well, the vast majority of whom are very competent Bahamians, to do a proper evaluation as to whether or not the services were provided. Importantly, though, the Minister of Works has said that the matter has been referred to the police. The report has been sent on to the police. So again, I trust our police officers, their power and capacity to investigate, and so step back. Politicians step away and let the police do their job.
Maynard Gibson says Bahamians should be concerned about who's next. Reporting for R News, I'm Georgia Bain.
Education Minister Jeff Lloyd is slamming successive governments for disrespecting and abusing Bahamian workers by sending them to various ministries without contracts which state the terms of their employment, the date of their engagement, and the contract's expiration date. He says while some of those workers are extraordinarily talented, the majority of them are slackers, adding an audit on who is needed will be completed soon. Here's April Sands.
When the Minnis administration took office in May of this year, Education Minister Jeff Lloyd says it discovered hundreds, if not thousands, of contract workers, whom he says have bypassed the ordinary methodology of hires, that is, in the public service. That is, applying for a job, participating in the interview process, and receiving a letter of appointment.
Disrespect that has been visited upon our people, for decades because of this particular practice, when they're just simply told to go to work, or go down to the Ministry of Education, go down to the Ministry of Agriculture, go down to the Ministry of Works. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing, who they're supposed to be reporting to, what the terms and conditions of your engagement are, and as a result, they are left in a confused state. And in that state, then all kinds of rumors and innuendos and suggestions, all of which are speculations and lies, happen to fill the void.
The long-standing issue was highlighted Thursday during a contentious meeting with hundreds of contract workers from the Ministry of Education who want to become permanent and pensionable. Lloyd says many of these workers have been on the job for up to 10 years. He revealed that an audit on who is needed in the Ministry of Education and who isn't will be completed soon.
The government of the Bahamas has decided that we will continue with some of these workers until a decision is made by the public service about those workers that are needed in the respective ministries, the Ministry of Education being one of them, and those who unfortunately we don't need. And that audit, as you would have reported some time ago, is now being conducted and will be concluded very soon.
The Education Minister says many of their contracts expired in June, but the government decided to keep them on until a decision has been made.
For many of these persons, the contracts usually end on the 30th of June, okay? What has happened over the years is that kept rolling over and kept rolling over. And so people have been stopping me all over this building and across this island. Mr. Lloyd, I want to be made PNP, which is permanent and pension, but be made PNP. Well, this morning, we advised them as to what is the process if you're interested in becoming permanent and pensionable, which is the process that any other individual candidate who wishes to become a part of the public service is going to have to follow, which is make an application, be interviewed by the Public Service Commission, and if you're found to be acceptable, then the process follows from there.
Lloyd noted that while there are some talented workers in the bunch, many of them are slackers.
Many of these contract workers are extraordinarily talented, gifted, committed, dedicated. But unfortunately, too large a percentage of them simply are slackers, who care nothing about being employed, who really are only here to collect a paycheck, and who are interfering with an efficient, proficient operation at the Ministry of Education and of the public service. We want all people to understand, if you are here to work, you better work. If you're here to do your job, you better do your job. Otherwise, you are going to be separated from the public service and the Ministry of Education.
Lloyd says there is a process by which employees should be properly engaged, and from now on, it will be followed. He added that they will undergo training to learn what is required of a public officer. He promised that if workers do their job, they will have a positive outcome.
When this happenstance and by the seat of your pants and, you know, whatever buck up goes, we are disrespecting our people. We are offering them a pathological disservice, and it is going to stop. And I want us to begin right now. Let's put an end to it. And they have nothing to fear. Do your job. Have the sense of responsibility about you, and the chips will fall where they may. And I'm sure it will be a positive outcome for many of them.
Back in January, the Christie administration said thousands of workers had been in this temporary state from as far back as 1993, adding that public service wrote to human resource departments in different ministries requesting recommendations on who should be made permanent and pensionable. By January of this year, officials said of the 2,500 temporary workers, 847 recommendations were made. Of that number, the process for 179 of them had been completed by January, while 227 were being worked on and 441 required completion. Reporting for our news, I'm April Sands.
Still to come on our news, the BPL chair defends the decision to part ways with Power Securities. Stay with us.